So hello and welcome to our session on practical tools to encourage self-direction among students for both in-person and remote learning. I'm Kathy White, Director of Innovative Projects at New Hampshire Learning Initiative and the Project Coordinator at NHLI for the BEST project. This BEST project is a collaborative endeavor, and you will hear from this group of individuals throughout the session. I just want to note that Dr. Felicia Sullivan, the lead researcher at JFF, is not presenting with us today. However, she's also been a critical person in this project as the project manager at JFF. So we'd like to get to know you a little bit. And get a sense of where you are in terms of thinking about self-direction and what it means for students. So if you would please enter in the chat your response to the prompt, what does self-direction mean to you? And how would you know that a student is self-directed? So BEST is an acronym, and the term was created by the teacher leads. It stands for Building Essential Skills Today for the Future. BEST is a research practice partnership formed to scale and diffuse the work study practices, also known as deeper learning competencies, in New Hampshire. The RPP is generously funded by the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, comprised of 4 organizations: Jobs for the Future, New Hampshire Learning Initiative, Center for Innovation and Education, and the New Hampshire Department of Education. For this project, we focused on the social studies content area. There were 4 school districts who were part of the actual study. The teacher leads who are social studies teachers are with us today for this presentation. In total, teachers from 10 districts engaged in professional learning on quality performance assessments and work study practices, supported by consulting experts from CCE, Karen Hess, Education, Research and Action, Wendy Sir, Consulting, and Knowledge Work students at the Center Hub. So the why behind our work: we are looking to elevate the teaching and assessment of essential skills, communication, collaboration, creativity, and self-direction. We know that these are the essential skills for success. Research has told us, and employers confirm this. BEST is working to shift how students learn and demonstrate the essential skills and how we are teaching and assessing with the same level of confidence that we assess the content area competencies. We are doing this through aligning the tools and rubrics to a developmentally backed research framework, teacher professional development, and instructional practices in the classroom. The result of this work is a self-direction toolkit, including the K-12 self-direction rubrics and the self-direction tools for grades 6 through 8. They've gone through a rigorous iterative design and validation process that includes student and teacher voice, leading to instruments with both construct and face validity. This has been an effort to meld practice expertise with research expertise to create valid and reliable performance assessment systems for these work study practices. In this session, Wendy, Karen, and the content leads will share the design process, the rubrics, and the tools with you. Jess, would you like to share the participant responses?
Sure. We were a little slow to start. Then once we got going, there were some pretty amazing ideas in there. So just to briefly summarize some of the things we heard, people mentioning that self-direction means to them students being able to articulate a vision for the future that empowers them. I thought that was a pretty deep idea there, and lots of ideas around choice. Students being able to choose their pathways, students being able to choose what resources they might utilize to reach standards, having students be demonstrating efficacy in their responsibility, and some ideas around how we know students are being self-directed. Students can ask for help, students can do things on their own, and I really love this idea. Students might be able to know things or do things that even their teachers don't know. I thought that was a nice way to summarize the notion that they really are moving forward with their own vision in mind. So at this point, we're going to turn things over to Dr. Karen Hess, who's going to talk to us about the self-direction rubrics and how they came to be.
Thanks, Jess. So my involvement with the project really started years ago with New Hampshire's competency work. And we did a lot of work with academic competencies, but how do you measure self-direction? And just like everyone had good responses in the chat, a lot of teachers had a lot of good ideas about what self-direction looked like. But if you're going to measure it consistently, and that's what my role was, to help think about how to measure it consistently, we had to have measurable and observable indicators. It had to be manageable. One of the things I saw in the early rubrics, where there's so many things teachers had to look for, it really wasn't manageable. It has to articulate increasing rigor. So it doesn't look the same at all grade levels, but it should be a continuum. And it should provide some instructional guidance, because we can't expect kids to just know how to do this. So that was our starting point. You can go to the next slide, Kathy. So in rethinking what it means to be self-directed, we went to the research, and some of the indicators of self-direction that we saw in the grounding research was self-awareness. How am I thinking about myself as a learner? How aware am I that I'm making progress? Because we know that's hugely important as a motivator for students to actually see progress. Initiative and ownership is, how do students bring their own personalization, personal perspective to the learning? So they're not just doing an assignment given to them. They are moving towards saying, here's a way I could show what I know. Goal setting and planning is another indicator of self-direction, and that's the ability of a student to take a complex task, break it down, and plan how to tackle it. Now, we might give kids a tool, like an action planning tool, but that in isolation isn't going to mean a student is self-directed. So this is all rolled in together again with engaging and managing. As they work through the learning, are they managing their time? Are they locating resources appropriate? And last of all, can they monitor and adapt? Do they know when something isn't working? And can they change directions? And we've used this metaphor of the rope. If you're familiar with Scarborough's reading rope metaphor, it's that these are all separate skills that have to work together and become stronger as they are woven together over time. And so that was our starting point to build the rubrics and build the measurement tools. Next slide. So in the essential skills and dispositions framework, which is what our starting point was, the description of these skills is a developmental approach, not a deficit perspective. So we don't look at beginners as being bad learners because they have something missing. They are children, students who are new to the task. They could be adults new to a task. And mostly they follow a model that's given to them. When they move to being an advanced beginner, they know familiar steps and they know how to do familiar things. We would call this near transfer. They can do things the way we've taught them. In our rubrics, that first level of beginner is called the emerging level, and the advanced beginner is now you're developing some of those skills. The strategic learner in the essential skills framework is a student who can analyze a situation, make a plan, determine what's going to work. Then they are applying, and you'll see this little thumbs up at that level in the rubrics. We don't call it proficient. It just means now you're able to move beyond the near transfer. Now you can apply it in different situations and figure out how to make it work. And at the highest level, the emerging expert can analyze unfamiliar situations. And so you will see expanding as the description for that level in the rubrics. Next slide. The last piece of research that we went to as we built the rubrics come from some of my work, what makes a high quality rubric. And one is the adjacent levels are qualitatively different. It's not just you do 3 more things or 1 more thing, that the quality changes over time as you move through the performance levels. All of the descriptions in the rubric are kid-friendly because we want them to self-assess. We want them to take responsibility for their own work. And we want to avoid negative behavior. So we fall into this pit sometimes of the lowest level says all the things you're not doing. You're not handing in work on time. That's just really talking about compliance or not being compliant. which is kind of the opposite of self-direction. So we try to make sure that at every level, all of the descriptions are stated in the positive. This is what is happening when you're just emerging. This is what's happening when you begin to develop those skills. This is what's happening when you're applying. It's not what isn't happening, it's what is happening. Next slide, please. So as we built the rubrics, we had to have some strategies to pilot with students. I'm going to just describe the rubrics a little bit, and then I'll pass it to Nicole and Tony. But all of the criteria are the same at all grade levels. That means we're looking at self-awareness. How am I learning about myself as a learner? We're looking at ownership and goal setting. But the other caveat is it's not one K-12 rubric. If you want to click once, Kathy. The performance, oh, go back.
Hold on.
Yeah, the performance descriptors at each grade span are slightly different. So self-awareness looks different in a K2 student than it looks in a grade 9-12 student. And one of the things that the earlier rubrics were causing teachers to have to say to students is, sorry, you can't be self-directed until you get to middle school. So we changed that perspective. You can be self-aware. You can set goals and make plans no matter what your grade span is. Thanks. So the descriptors are different and age appropriate, but the criteria remain the same at all grade levels. And so we're just going to quickly show you the grades 6 through 8 rubric. Oh, I forgot about this slide now. One other note. Collaboration in the research, collaboration is a component of self-direction. So this means that students don't become self-directed learners on their own. They learn how to advocate for themselves, to ask for input, to seek out a mentor. And so you will see collaboration skills built into the rubrics as well. Now we'll take a look at 6 through 8. So it's kind of a kid-friendly looking rubric. They're all stated in the positive. You see the emerging levels. And if you were to kind of skim that very quickly, you would see in the emerging level, in that second column, I can choose a learning opportunity from options provided by others. So that's the very beginning of collaboration. I'm willing to listen to ideas from us. And if you move down that column, you would see that they are seeking support. They are setting their learning goals that match their personal interests. So here and there, you will see aspects of collaborative skills. And then in the 9 through 12, you'll notice that these descriptors are not identical, but they also have some aspects of collaboration skills embedded in them. We're currently working on a collaboration rubric, but we wanted to recognize that collaboration is an important component of building these skills. And if we go to the next. So I'm going to pass things to Nicole and Tony. They're going to talk a little bit about how they introduced the rubrics to students, how they got feedback on the rubric wording from students. And so Nicole and Tony, I'll pass it to you.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Tony Doucette. I'm a 9th grade teacher at Souhegan High School. And one of the things that, and Nicole and I, I'll let Nicole introduce herself in a second, went through, and one of the big things that we did was we used a think aloud protocol. So you can see the focus group questions up there. I'm not going to read them all out to you because you can see them. But one of the things we did was I put together a group of students that was intentionally not loading the dice. It would have been really easy to grab a group of my highest achievers and put them together and have them say like, oh, this will be super easy and great, and I love it. So what we intentionally did was we chose a mix of students who are at all levels of self-direction skill, and we had them take a look at the rubric. And we met on a Zoom meeting, we hopped on, we gathered feedback, and we used these questions to try to elicit that information from them. So some of their responses you'll be able to see on this next slide, where a lot of the students, one one of the first things was they really enjoyed the layout of the applying section. And the applying section was where we started looking at, because we figured that was one of the more important points to start with. And the feedback was they really understood the layout, like it made sense to them, which is very important, right? If the students can't make sense of it, then it doesn't really work. They also thought that the rubric was great for helping with reflection, for helping them think about what their goals were and how they met them, and be able to take their past actions and experiences and apply them to this new learning. One of the things that Karen mentioned is the positive language, and the students picked up on that right away. They liked how it shows what you did do, as opposed to saying you did a really bad job with this, or this is what you're missing. No matter what the level, it talked about something that the students were able to do. And then it also shows you what you could have done, right? What you should have done instead. But it doesn't make them feel bad about what they did. So that lack of negative language was very beneficial to them. And then lastly, they thought each level made sense in terms of increasing expectations. Sometimes you'll have rubrics where things don't connect clearly, and they were able to see each of these connections progress through the different levels. Now I'll throw it over to Nicole.
Hi guys, my name is Nicole Wolf. I teach 8th grade right now at Sanborn Regional Middle School, but last year I was a 6th grade social studies teacher. And I want to apologize in advance. It's currently dismissal at my school. We have an early release today, so I apologize if you hear any additional sounds. My 6th graders saw a lot of versions of the self-direction rubric. So on March 10th, I presented our newest version, and my students, like Tony's, found that the design of the rubric was easier to use. They started mentioning right away how there were fewer words compared to our first or second drafts of the rubric. And they really appreciated that flow. They also thought it was more kid-friendly. For my students, it was easier for them to understand the different levels within the rubric. Thank you. And as I had projected the rubric on my whiteboard, I was going through the different levels of the rubric and modeling, this is what this could mean, here's what this level could mean. And my students started interrupting me with their own examples. Normally, I don't appreciate being interrupted, but I was really grateful because it showed me that they understood what the rubric was presenting. Tragically, we presented this rubric on March 12th, and we shifted to remote learning on March 13th. So for my students, it was just an overview. We didn't have the opportunity to use it, but I was really excited with their feedback at the start.
Hi, I'm Wendy Sir. I'm a senior research consultant on this team. And one of my roles was to help the team as they developed the rubrics and processes to make sure everything was reliable and valid. And as you just heard from Nicole and Tony, part of the validity testing was working to make sure that the rubrics could be understood by students. This project's been going on for a couple of years. And in the first go-round, folks worked on tasks that kids could do to demonstrate their self-directions. And one of the big aha moments after the first year and the first round was that looking at a task alone was not providing the kind of evidence that teachers needed to be able to score students' self-direction. In particular, there was this realization that self-direction is something that becomes evident along the way. And so members of the team got together to develop some tools that we're calling evidence collection tools that could help generate the kind of evidence that you might need to see if students are self-directed. We then started to do an iterative process where we did a crosswalk with the rubrics that Dr. Hess was presenting. So what you see here on the screen is some of the crosswalking that we did. For instance, one of the tools that you're going to see in a moment that our team put together asked kids to work on an action plan. And we were able to show that the steps are involved in action planning help to provide some of the evidence for goal setting and planning, which is one of the 5 areas of self-direction. You're seeing on the screen also that we don't see self-awareness for this particular part of the toolkit. And we have 2 members of the team that I'd like to introduce, Beth Gazoulis and Kathy Bayless, who worked on our first tool, which is tool 1, which is about students self-assessing their self-direction. And this is one of those key areas that can help generate the evidence for self-awareness as part of self-direction. So I'd like to hand it over to Beth and Kathy.
Hi, my name is Kathy Bayless. I'm a 7th grade social studies teacher at Laconia Middle School. Next slide, please. And the first tool we're going to introduce is actually a pre-assessment of self-direction. And this tool is intended to be a means for teachers to assess a student's ability for self-directed learning, and also for students to assess themselves, to see where they are in their ability to proceed with self-directed learning. Next slide, please. Throughout this presentation of this tool, I'm asking for you to take a look, see how this tool might be beneficial for your classroom, and any questions or thoughts you have in the chat, and then we'll address those at the end. Next slide, please. So the first question, why self-assess? We know that students do not magically materialize with an ability to be completely self-directed and own their learning. It's not already embedded in their learning process. So self-direction skills develop over time. And this tool is used to assess specific skills. Some students may be very strong at self-awareness. They may be very open to asking questions. Some may be very goal-oriented, but not all students can see that in themselves. So this is intended to build some self-awareness with the student and also gauge growth from year to year for the teachers. This tool is particularly beneficial if you are using a portfolio that travels with students from year to year. It can be cross contents. It doesn't have to be specific to one content area. But collecting and documenting using this tool will show a student's growth in these particular areas over time. Next slide, please. This tool is also about the process. Like I believe Tony mentioned, you need to introduce and reintroduce the rubric. We want to make sure that students understand the language of the rubric and therefore will understand the language of the tool. So it would be introduced and reintroduced over time. And of course, as time goes on, you won't have to be quite as in-depth with using that language over and over in the classroom, because they will begin to understand it on their own. This tool also has teacher instructions, but has built-in modifications for teachers to personalize their instruction. We all have different students with different needs, different ability levels, and the tools are not finite for just this classroom, this student, this is how you use it. This can be modified to work for any teacher at any level in any content area. It was created based on student and teacher feedback that was given with the original iterations of the tool. So as we created the tool, we got feedback from teachers, we got feedback from students, and kind of modified it based on those ideas. And of course, we used the research and development from the essential skills and dispositions to support what we were creating when we created it. Next slide, please. This is considered a tool for success. You have specific goals that you're reaching for here. You want to identify, assess, and reflect. So you are, oh, I lost my place here. So you're having students identify specifically what their skills are. And you're doing this in a positive way that's aligned with the rubric. I can. What can I do? What do I feel my strengths are? What do I feel, my challenges might be, or my motivations? You're having them identify what they feel their ability is, and then you're having them assess their level of those abilities, again, based on the rubric, using the same language on the rubric. Am I emerging? Am I developing? Am I applying? Am I extending? And you're going to travel these tools over time. So where a student may have felt they were emerging in their ability to communicate last year, this year they may be saying, no, I'm already applying that. And that gives the teacher insight into where they were, where they feel they are, and how far they've come over time. And then you're asking students not just to say, I'm applying, because we know, especially middle school students are going to say, yep, I can do that. We want you to put some evidence in there. Tell me why you feel that way. What evidence do you have that can support why you believe this? And that, again, traveling over time will be invaluable for teachers as they receive students in different content areas or grade levels. Next slide, please. So Beth Gazoulis had the opportunity to implement this in the classroom. So I'm going to turn it over to Beth to talk about how this worked in her classroom.
Hi, I'm Beth Gazoulis, and I teach at Rochester Middle School, 8th grade social studies. And I had the opportunity to work with this last year in the spring, and I piloted it with a group of students. And then with the new changes that we had made to this, I was able to pilot it again this fall with my kids. And so a lot of my kids loved this. There were some challenges for some of my kids, but my district has just started with self-direction. So this is a new mindset for a lot of my kids. Many of the kids felt, because we were in school, we have a socially distanced classroom, that this natural learning environment really led to some great interactions between the teachers and the students. And that because we're in the building, I'm able to give them their explanations that they need, but also they were able to ask questions if they had difficulty with the section. Some kids struggled in the sense that they weren't able to be reflective because this was a new mindset for them, and to really see themselves and be self-aware was a struggle for some kids, but we definitely worked through it. We saw that their peer support that they were able to work with, even though it was a socially distanced peer support, that they still are able to get that support from one another. And also I can use this over time. So I'm going to go back to this tool, not just once, perhaps 2 or 3 times. So that way they can see the growth over the year that they have made on recognizing their self-direction and being able to talk about it. I really felt that this tool created a nice bridge between the rubric and the kids, and that way they could actually see the rubric in action, and we're really able to identify some of the places that they were emerging or developing or even applying. Next slide.
So Beth had used it in class. Much like Nicole, I did not have the opportunity when it was planned to use it in class last year because it was planned for the first week in April. And we went to remote learning, and I wasn't prepared for a remote learning opportunity with the tool at that time. So this year at Laconia Middle School, we are currently a hybrid school. So I have sets of students every other day. We have our A group and our B group who are in class one day, at home the next. So I thought that might be a good opportunity to use this tool remotely, if not semi-remotely, by introducing the rubric to the students for the first time while they were in class. I introduced it to them live in the classroom. They had never seen it before, so it was, you know, something that they needed to talk to me about and ask questions about. And then for their remote assignment the next day, I attached it in Google Classroom. And, you know, I made sure they understood this isn't any kind of graded assessment, because, you know, 7th graders immediately go, wait, is this going to be graded? Is this a grade? And I explained to them, you know, this is something I'd like you to use what we talked about yesterday to assess yourself today. And the responses were interesting. When they were back in class again the next day, I was able to get verbal feedback and responses from them about what they had experienced doing this remotely. The version I used was not a writable PDF. I used a version in my Google Classroom that I made writable for them, but the website will have a writable PDF on it when it's fully available. And the kids really liked that idea. They liked that they could just type in the answers. They could just write what they wanted to write right on their computer, and it was saved for them. I had students comment that they liked that they had unlimited time so that they could actually think about what they wanted to say. They felt like if they had been in the classroom, they would have felt rushed. There were students who reached out to me with questions while they were completing this. And it was really nice for me and for them to have that one-to-one communication with them. And I also felt, and there was a student who did comment on this, that it was more personalized. They could be more honest. They weren't in the classroom and feeling like someone might see this, or someone might hear me, or someone might be looking at my paper, and they were much more honest about what they were saying, what they felt their strengths were, what they felt they needed to work on, or what their challenges were. Remotely, like a lot of the experience I've had with remote learning in general, there was a lack of completion, particularly among my most at-risk students. That's something that has been a challenge with particularly at-risk students across the board with remote learning. So that's definitely something to look at, and I would love feedback on that from teachers who've been in the similar situations. There was, for some students, an inability to ask questions. Some of them were doing it at 9 o'clock at night when I was no longer online to ask questions. Some may have just had a lack of a willingness to ask questions. And then when they came the next day, they said, well, I didn't fill in this part because I didn't get it. So there's that piece. And then there was a little bit of a feeling among some students being overwhelmed by the tool itself. And I feel like that could have been attributed to the fact that they had never been introduced to the rubric before. I think, again, that's something that over time, as they become more comfortable, will become easier for them to access. And some of them did feel that they wish they had been in a classroom where they could have heard what other people had to say. Just that comfort of being in a room with other kids. And, you've always got students who don't want to ask a question that they have, and they're so grateful when somebody else asks it for them because they wanted that information. So there were students who commented that they would have liked to heard what other kids had to say too. So, I do feel it could definitely be a successful remote learning tool. I think there's going to be challenges no matter which way you look at it with remote learning, as remote learning is right now. And especially with hybrid, some of the kids just wanted to get back to the classroom to talk about it. But I did feel it was successful in that they took it, they completed it, and they felt like they had done something for themselves. Next slide. So back to the questions.
So Jess is going to give us a summary of what's in the chat.
Sure. So not a lot of discussion on this particular question, although we may want to open a little space for anything you've heard up to this point. But let me just summarize what has been said about the question of how it might be beneficial in your classroom. So Ashley started us off by noting that it can help to build trust among students, particularly because they're the ones that hold the right answer in this case. It's about them. Dr. Hess reminded us that self-reflection really is our most powerful assessment for assessing learning, and that's what this tool is all about. And that shift from assessment of learning, which is very teacher-driven, to assessment for learning, which is student-driven, really is highlighted by this tool and this process. This also could be noted, as Maria mentioned, as a bridge or a connection for student learning pathways. This could be a jumping off point for establishing what might be an appropriate pathway for a student. And then there was also an idea posted around if you were in a district that had a really large English language learning population. I believe it was Jason who mentioned in his district 40% of students fall into this category. Might the rubric need to be even further simplified for language to be more accessible to all learners? Which really also brings up another point around the varying districts that we all teach in regard to the socioeconomic status, and that in some districts, students might have been spending a lot of time really based in a compliance place, and that this process and these tools are really helping students to move away from just complying, but really thinking for themselves about their learning. I know a couple more things have popped up in the time that I've been sharing, and I didn't get a chance to see what those were. Previously, there were also a lot of questions about where to find this information. And it will be available both through the website that we'll give you a link to, and then Aurora will also be posting a recording of the session and of our slides. I don't know if anyone sees anything else that's popped up or that I didn't mention before we move on to the next section.
Yes, this is Wendy. I'm seeing that Jason's asking about the instructional supports, and I think that's a good segue to Tool 2, which helps to scaffold some of that learning. In addition, Jason, over time, we're hoping to build into our toolkit just examples of how teachers have supported the learning of the self-direction skills and competencies.
Yeah, I agree, Wendy, thank you. So I guess we'll jump in here looking at Tool 2, or what we're now calling our self-direction roadmap. So this is something that you're going to hear from me. I haven't introduced myself yet. I apologize. My name is Jessica Tremblay, and I teach social studies at Souhegan High School in Amherst, New Hampshire. And I'm joined today by my colleagues, Nicole and Donna, who will introduce themselves as we get going through here. First, Nicole.
Yeah, I am excited to join you again now that dismissal has ended and it's a little quieter here at the middle school, and provide you with an overview of the roadmap. And I love that people were asking about instruction. Instruction is one of my favorite things, and I think the most critical when it comes to self-direction. We want to make sure students have the tools to be successful. And this roadmap that we've been able to design and redesign again has helped students grow as self-directed learners. And I'm going to show you a little bit about those steps. So step 1 is where students are coming up with their action plan. They're understanding the task. We can give this with any discipline. So we've been using it with social studies tasks, but this works in any classroom or in any setting. Students determine those learning goals using that tool 1 of the pre-assessment, and then make an action plan, how they're going to tackle a task. Step 2 is that self-direction goal and action plan review, and teaching students how to write goals and meet goals is a critical part of this roadmap. I found in just interviewing my students the last couple of weeks as we transitioned from remote learning to in-person learning, that goal setting helps them stay focused, and that's such a critical part of our roadmap. It also includes a mid-task checkpoint for step 3, and this is the hardest part for learners, as we'll talk about, for them to really take that pause and reflect on how their action plan is going, get input from others, teachers, or peers, and then make changes if needed. And then that post-task reflection. So this roadmap, I know sounds lengthy, but there is a method to our madness. You go to the next slide for me, Kathy. We also have some questions. So just like Tool 1, we want you guys to think about these questions as we present and delve a little bit deeper into Tool 2. Hop in that chat at any point, and then we will summarize and reflect on those questions at the end. The first question is, which part of the roadmap resonates with your current practice and how? The second question is, which part of the roadmap are you most likely to add to your practice and why? Jess, can I hand it off to you for the next slide?
Yes, please. So we want to take you back to step 1 of this Tool 2, and there's a lot to navigate here. So we want to pause and explain that the real difference between This second tool and the first one that you heard Kathy and Beth talk about is that this is really a task-specific tool. So this is a place where students can anchor their thinking or their ability to be metacognitive about their learning in a very specific task that you have provided for them in the classroom. So in this first step of the roadmap, as mentioned previously, they're creating an action plan. And what's interesting about the name of this particular tool, we call it a roadmap because now there's a little bit of a more tangible destination, this project or this task that you want students to complete, and asking them to take the time to stop and think about how they're going to get there. They're creating their own map for getting to that destination. And because it's task specific, it helps to push students to be very metacognitive in a very concrete venue. And if you look at the chart that's on the slide here, it's also fairly concrete. So it's not just what step do you need to take, but also what strategy will you use to achieve that step. So this is a tool that I've used actually over the past 3 years with students. And each time we use it, we are able to tweak it based on their input. And each time we're hoping to deepen our evidence collection around eliciting self-direction. The most recent time I used this tool was actually the last thing I did in person last spring with students in March. So I haven't had a chance to use it yet in a remote setting. So I'm going to ask Tony to speak for a moment about what that might look like with remote learning.
Yeah, hi. So I'm back. And at Souhegan High School, we are currently in a hybrid model. So I've got students who are remote and in person at the same time. And we just started using this roadmap a couple of weeks ago as we began one of our final performance assessments in my social studies class. And one of the pieces of feedback that we heard from remote students was that it really was helpful for them to monitor their own learning. In terms of they liked the ability to have, and they didn't use this word, but we would say like there was increased agency in terms of how they were able to structure the format, when they were able to have their due date. So they could set up their own checklists. And they really did appreciate having that. It gave them something that they had concrete in front of them to work on. Because we do have those students who it seems like they are on, they've got their cameras off and they're hard to find. And they can try to fade into the background. And going over this roadmap with them after they've sort of built it themselves really was useful for helping them stay on track and through the check-in process. And we are actually just about to enter into the mid-task checkpoint piece. We did that a little bit on Monday, and we're continuing that tomorrow and Friday. Now we can move on.
All right, using tool 2 with various grade levels means that there's going to be instructional scaffolds. So for me, teaching 6th graders, it's going to look different than Donna and Jess teaching high school students. In 6th grade, there was a lot of modeling, or as I tell my students, we are super modeling. And as we go through the different steps, I recorded a lot of videos and provided examples so students had a better idea of how to fill out portions of the tool. The hardest part for my 6th graders was applying. So they were really good at listing challenges they were having, but they had a harder time figuring out how to overcome those challenges. That's when we used a lot of peer advice. We checked in small groups. We had people just ask the audience, almost like it was a talk show at some point, like, I'm having this problem, what should I do? And that was a really great way for students to build those collaborative skills and to get ideas from their peers on how to be better successful.
Hi, I'm Donna Harvey. I teach at Sanborn Regional High School, and you'll have to bear with me because some of Nicole's dismissal noise just walked in my front door a little while ago. So it might be a little unpredictable here. So I used this tool actually just before remote learning started as well, with some of my juniors and seniors in the psychology class. And the results that I got are probably a little bit different than if I had used it in another place. I used it with my honors level psychology students who want to be very independent, who want to be able to work at their own pace, on their own, with very little modeling or scaffolding. If I were using it with my sophomores, who I would argue are more like 8th graders than upperclassmen, I would obviously have to do a lot more. One of the larger challenges for this group of high functioning, highly motivated students is that they're very product driven. What do I have to do? Let me get it done. They didn't necessarily want to enjoy the process, experience the process. They just wanted to get it done. So sometimes they felt like they had to go backwards because they pushed forward and then had to go back to the form to fill things out. But that's an important lesson, I think, for all of us to learn, is that the process matters too, not just the product. Next slide, please, Kathy. So when the tool was originally designed, we had the opportunity to get feedback from a couple of different groups. We got feedback from students. Jess had some of her students do some work because she had used it for a number of years, but we also had our work group for PACE, for social studies PACE, use some of these tools and evaluate the effectiveness of evidence gathering. So from the students, the original versions felt sort of redundant because some of the post-task reflection comments were the same on what was Tool 1 and Tool 3, which have now merged together into this roadmap. So that was a direct result of student information and opinion. And then the naming this tool and how to encompass everything that was included. It started out being just called the action plan, but really evolved into so much more. And I think we finally hit the mark with roadmap, as Jess eloquently explained earlier. It really is about getting to the destination and the steps along the way, and that's what's in this tool now. So that was student feedback. Also, that there was too much scaffolding or not enough scaffolding, depending on the grade level. So we tried to address that in this tool and really talk about the importance of flexibility there for teachers to determine what their students needed in terms of what you had to do versus what you could do. And then the teacher feedback was actually interesting because we compared the tool and the evidence we got from the tool and the rubric, and we realized that our original tool did a really good job meeting certain dimensions and not others. So that's another reason why it underwent some pretty significant revisions. So I'm gonna throw it to Nicole. And
thanks, Donna. So I'm thinking about this tool and how it might be different from other tools that are similar. I know we have a lot of questions coming through with the chat. I'm impressed at how chatty you guys are in there, and I love it. We did include students in our work. So in addition for teachers keeping really an eye on that rubric, an eye on the prize, if you will, we wanted kids to be part of this team. And as students gave us feedback, we were able to make stronger learning goals. We were able to make a chart for checkpoints that were helpful for students. We were able to iron out some redundancies, as Donna noted in that post-reflection. And we really thought with working with students and collaborating with ourselves and our experts like Dr. Karen Hess and Wendy, we were able to streamline the tool to meet the needs of learners with different scaffolding needs. Jess, do you want to talk a little bit about the connection to the rubric?
Yes, so this, I think I was well positioned to describe this from both what you heard earlier from Dr. Hess and also from Wendy's work with the crosswalk. While we knew that earlier versions of this tool had demonstrated positive results when we calibrated the student work across our team, One of the things that we noticed that was posing a challenge for scoring was collaboration. And as we heard from Karen earlier, while you might not think of collaboration as self-direction, they might seem inherently different. In fact, they are explicitly connected, or perhaps more implicitly connected. So we wanted to provide opportunities for students to be able to engage with one another in order to develop their self-direction skill. And that's what you see in this step 3 of this particular tool or this roadmap, where we ask students or invite students to engage in a peer review protocol. And it can happen in 2 different places in the roadmap. Step 3 and step 2 both have that opportunity. But asking students to explicitly pause and share their observations with one another, so that you have yet more evidence to gather around that element of self-direction. I think this visual on this slide shows you that through that protocol, we actually do hit all 5 dimensions of the rubric for self-direction. And while we'll continue to pilot these tools, I think part of what I see emerging a little bit in the chat, and we'll hear more about that maybe in a moment from Nicole and Donna, who've been looking at it closely, is the idea that some additional information around how we instruct on this might be helpful for different teachers to think about how it will be used within your own schools and your own districts, recognizing that we all know our students best, and what works for me in Southern New Hampshire might not work for someone in another place somewhere else in the country. But if all of this work is anchored in that essential skill and disposition framework, which was our starting point, I think it does help to bring some, I don't like to use the word uniformity because that makes it sound cookie cutter-ish, but rather some consistency across the country around what it means to develop such an important skill around being metacognitive and asking students to really own their own learning, because that's really what's at the heart of this process, and maybe in part what we think makes this different from other types of goal setting is being anchored in that essential skills and dispositions framework. So maybe to take a more specific look at how we're doing addressing those questions, Nicole or Donna, how's the chat looking, and what do we need to make sure we answer?
The chat is very active. It's sometimes a little different than my remote learning chat. I love having adults in here. We're having a lot of comments about how people are using roadmap-like tools and sort of ironing out what is different from the tool that we're presenting to tools that they've used in their own classroom. I think people are still pondering maybe which part of the roadmap resonates with their current practice. I think people are still thinking about those questions. But I did notice a lot of discussion on metacognition in general and how we can make sure to include that in our classroom instruction. Donna, what were you seeing?
I see a lot of back and forth, actually. I think that Karen and Wendy are doing a really good job of answering people's questions as they come up and simplifying our job significantly right now in going over the task. But I do think instruction is something that has come up several times in the chat, and also, yeah, metacognition versus emotional self-regulation, I think was there as well.
So, Donna, if I could just kind of jump in here. Some of the things I put in the chat. So the idea of a developmental progression doesn't mean it happens magically when kids get taller. It means that we intentionally teach the skill. So when a lot of people are asking about instructional strategies, here's the thing to think about with metacognition. We only know if kids are being metacognitive if we ask them to reflect on what they've done. Because you can't just watch a student and to know what they're thinking until you ask them, why did you make that decision? So conferencing throughout the time, but 3 strategies I put in there. A think aloud might be stop and talk about what decision did you just make and why did you make it? So it's making it observable and measurable for all kids. Connecting this back to the research on social emotional learning, self-awareness as a learner is part of that social and emotional development. Self-management, how do you manage yourself individually and work with others? So there's a lot of overlap with the social emotional learning research and the self-direction research. The other thing that I would suggest, and it's very powerful, to show students, give them a framework for how to put together a reflection. So the tools are kind of getting kids prepared to do that, but showing them other reflections that other students have written to, oh, that's how I might explain this or show this. So just like we have exemplar pieces of writing or exemplar pieces of mathematics problem solving, kids need to understand, well, what are the components I need to address in a good self-reflection piece, because that's what gets at the metacognitive piece. So maybe those things will be helpful. I also suggested in the chat that you could take these rubrics and build a performance scale with them. And I will be talking more about how to do that in a November 10th Aurora Institute. I don't want to take up time here, but it's kind of logical. It makes sense. You have kids work at a level before they go to the next level, so they're not just jumping in at any level. And for some kids, they need to feel that developmental progression. So toss it back to Donna or Jess, whoever I just interrupted.
Oh, no, it was perfectly timed. Actually, I just wanted to open up the discussion to anyone who has any additional questions. I think we're moving on to that portion of the event. So if you want to type it in the chat or unmute yourself and ask, we'd be happy to answer in the next few minutes.
And maybe Kathy, if you want to advance to that next slide, some of the questions might be, what other resources are there? So as mentioned earlier, this will be available through the Aurora Institute, and those are links you can click on to see each of those documents.
And we're hoping the finalized toolkit will be available in a couple of weeks.
You can look for that online as well.
Kathy, the toolkit will be on the BEST website, yes?
Yes, it'll be on the best-future.org. Oh, thank you. I got to put that in the chat.
Okay. Yeah, somebody was just asking, so I wanted to make sure that we got that out there. Karen, somebody's asking about how they can access your November 10th session.
I saw that. It's an Aurora Institute post-institute session. I will post the link on my website, but if you, I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but I'll post it on my website and you can register just like you did for this one. That's a more in depth, it's a 2-hour, and we will go into more depth on how to develop a performance scale, how to develop performance tasks, how to build a body of evidence, some of those pieces that this fits right into. So how do you build a performance task where you build in the self-direction skills as part of the whole process? Oh, thank you. Thank you. Somebody just posted the post sessions.
Oh, great. And I just wanted to know a couple other things that you might see in the chat. There's a survey for this session. There is also the link that Kathy posted for our BEST website. So lots of good resources heading into the chat. So if you need to click on any of those before you exit, please make sure you do that.
So I went to that link. It's actually the name of the webinar on November 10th is Deeper Competency-Based Learning, Making Equitable Student-Centered Sustainable Shifts. We will address performance scales in that, but there's also another one on November 5th that Bob Marzano is doing. He approaches it a little bit differently, but it's the same idea. So they call them proficiency scales. We call them performance because it's not about scoring. But
Thank you,
both of them are
Karen.
there, so there's two good resources.
Okay, thank you, Karen, and thank you to all our presenters and to all the participants. Whitney, do you want to say anything before we go?
No, that's about it.
Okay. Well, thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much.